Hello everyone, this is the second video in our discussion series on neurophysiotherapy approaches. In the last video, we have discussed the context in which neurophysiotherapy approaches were developed. And in this discussion, we will be elaborating much about the theoretical assumptions. Each of these approaches have assumed uh, how patients' disability is evolved, and also how patients might recover as they receive this treatment, and so on and so forth. So we will start with first question, and we have again uh, Mr. Hariom with us. Yes.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. Fine. So to continue with the last discussion, we have tried to give quite a historical and also from a knowledge context at that time when these approaches have developed. There are a couple of questions that I want to start off to explore about the what are the fundamental assumptions about recovery. I'll start with more of a simpler question. That is, why do you think there were so many approaches? What is the need for multiple approaches, which is all evolved more or less in the same time?
Um, when most of the time it looks like that, it's a personal opinion. When the scientific process is not solid, or the scientific basis of what we're doing is not very clear, then everybody tends to throw their own theory from their lived experience. I think that's one of the reasons why we had a lot of approaches. No, even now in this pandemic, you can see everybody comes up with their own treatment because the science behind the COVID natural history of the disease, how people get better, who doesn't get better, who dies. We have a little idea, so everybody throws their own 2 cents, I suppose. So that might be one of the reasons why we had poor. If we have poor science behind thinking, everybody comes up with their own school of thought, if you will.
So, I mean, you are referring to this old folk story of blind man trying to figure out an elephant.
Probably. Some of them would have got it correct. There's no question about it. But that's one of the reasons why you get that. Some of them would have sort of found out that it was an elephant. But they didn't. But you could. But that's the point, because we don't have a clearer method to find that this is an elephant or something like that. We just keep on touching one part of it.
Right. The topic of today's discussion, I believe, may not be very hip for many people. It doesn't sound that way because there is often sort of uh, dislike towards the word theory when it comes to, at least in physiotherapy, where I can say that because theory means theory is not important, and we have
Right.
to know the practical and so
Right.
on. So we'll start off with this common assumptions, and also this statement people often throw it: there is less theory and more practice, or sort of overemphasis on practice. So, what are your thoughts on why theory or theoretical assumptions are important for us to learn these approaches?
Uh, uh, if you if you are learning by doing, right? That's basically what they say, that you need a lot of practicals and things like that. It's very difficult to solve a problem which is novel. suddenly you have a problem which you have never seen,
Yeah.
you're not going to solve it because you don't have the theoretical assumptions behind what you were doing until that particular point of time. So that is the, I think that's the fundamental issue of having a theoretical knowledge, so that even if I don't have a understanding about, or I have never seen about a particular disease or something like that, I would somehow make up a way of looking at it. That
It's
was,
an irony, don't you think? Because for years, traditionally physiotherapists have fought against the label of technicians being given to them. On the other hand, all their or most of them are fascinated with learning only techniques, as you're pointing out, the problem solving ability, that is the cognitive aspects underlying problem solving is often given less importance. And also many of them seems to be wanting to learn techniques without learning about the underlying reasoning or of that techniques.
no, I understand. One of the reasons for that, I think, lies, the blame lies in our uh, teaching and the curriculum, right? When I went to college, we studied physiology for 6 months, and we wrote an exam after 6 months. Um, you can't even study uh, half of in the simplest physiology book, half of it you can't study in 6 months. So we, because we didn't understand a lot of the theoretical ideas, that is the physiology or the epidemiological part of it, or even the pathology, because we had very little understanding of that. We tend to think that uh, sort of it's a defensive mechanism, saying, that's not important. But if you if, if you see uh, any person who is pushing the science from one part to another, uh, that is from one paradigm to another, they should have a huge theoretical basis, whether it is Kepler, Newton, Galileo, Einstein. They all made a huge difference, paradigm shift based on solid theory. And you can see that you can derive most of our the physical world based on theories which was written long back by Newton or uh, Einstein, right? So you need the solid theory to make the technical aspects of it, the practical aspects of it. Right? But as I told you, we have this aversion towards theory because we don't study theory in college.
To clarify the word theory or why it's important, theories are basically they provide explanations about a phenomenon. What is this? We can ask.
Right.
Let us say if you are talking specifically about physiotherapy, is that if you're asking why a patient is coming with a circumdictory gait, we're asking why. Now that I'm sure all of many of us recognize it's an important question to solve that problem. It is the theory that explains why, and depending upon which theoretical position one's look at, the explanation tend to change. Right?
Yep.
So that is why we need, if you're looking for explanations that are more closer to the fact, then we need better theories. A same problem can be viewed entirely differently if you take two different approaches, two different theoretical positions. Uh, to give an example in the approaches itself, even though I don't think it's a difference in theoretical framework, but two major or the popular approaches, Bobath and Brainstorm, have looked at a problem, have looked at spasticity as from a completely different perspective, where Bobath was they viewed spasticity as the primary impairment. It is the primary impairment that should be inhibited or reduced at any or prevented at any cost. On the other hand, if you take Brunstrom, that at certain point of time, they actually encouraged spasticity.
That is depending upon the phase of recovery.
Yeah, right. And this is an opposite approach. And both of them were influenced by reflex hierarchical theory. But for some reason, I personally think Brunstrom's approach was more pragmatic, that whereas the Bobat was very conservative in their approach in terms of the way they looked at it. Again, this is just my personal opinion.
But the opposite also holds true in the sense that one of the greatest contribution of Bobat was going from 6 levels of recovery as in Brunstrom to just saying that you get a stroke, you get a flaccid state, and then you get a spastic state. And also, she was the one who sort of didn't look at or she was not so concerned with the synergies as such. So she was more concerned with the movements part of it. And I'm just saying to sort of the other way around also is true.
Yeah.
That's what
Right. So to coming back to the theory and what a theory means, as I was just pointing out, a theory is basically an explanation. And these explanations which is one comes up with an explanation based upon a set of assumptions. And a good theory is a theory in which these set of assumptions that makes this theory, these set of assumptions have been proved correct so far. That's what a good theory differentiate a good theory, or some, rather than saying bad, I would say the outdated theory, where some of the assumptions were proven not to be right, and therefore a theory becomes outdated, newer assumptions were made, or sometimes completely newer theories are developed. This is how the science progresses. And keep in mind, this is a progression. It is not like it's a competition against theories, or who is better or who is not better. It's not about that. This is how progression takes place when we have a better understanding of a phenomenon. And this better understanding can be due to many things. We have better tools to look at things, and we have access to better research, newer ideas. All of it, when it is developed, we started looking at the elephant is more likely closer to an elephant rather than thinking it is something different. And also in many cases, we no longer remain as blind men, or we remain as someone with a reasonable vision, not complete vision, that you can have a more
something like that.
Yeah, so sort of closer picture. This is what science progression takes place, and this is what a theory gives. It gives them the tools to way to look at it. You come up with assumptions and test it and so on. So to come back to the approaches, what are the assumptions that these approaches were based upon? Obviously, there are certain, it is coming from assumptions from motor control theories that are prevalent at that time. And also, I believe each of the developers of the approaches also have made certain personal assumptions based upon clinical observation. So what are your thoughts about, let us take overall, I think most of these approaches have certain commonality around it. So we'll discuss that, and then we'll discuss some differences between these approaches.
Now, one of the things which any good scientist, especially in the early part of the last century, when they studied a complex system, right, whether it is the solar system or the atom or anything, they try to be, they stripped it to smaller parts, and if you find the truth in the smaller parts, you can fit it into the larger parts.
Reductionist approach.
That's what, yes, that's what we call it as a reductionist approach. That was the common thing. You can see that in Newtonian thinking, from Newtonian thinking to uh, uh, anything in that particular era, it was done like that. Say, for example, Darwin looks at the smaller parts, but came up with a larger theory, where most of them sort of they study the smaller parts so that they can make a assumption of the lab. Say, for example, the Apple story of things falling down on the Earth is true to any galaxy, that kind of thing. So I think so. What I thought was, if you study, say, for example, if I study biceps and how it works, what is the impulse, where it travels, what happens to the other muscles, and things like that, then I can understand reaching. That was the, so this is the reductionist approach, and the overall reaching is the larger picture, the macro picture. So I think they use a reductionist approach, and uh, Sherrington made some extraordinary, wonderful experiments, which still holds true. Most of his theoretical ideas still holds true. But it was a sort of a reductionistic system. So what I mean by reductionist system here is, if I give an impulse, you get a response, right? So
Yeah.
it was basic idea was that that stimulus can be manipulated so that the response can be also changed, right? So you change the input of the sensory system, you change the motor response. So I think all the theoretical ideas, I mean, all the approaches, even though they don't understand that it's all the same, they all come from this basic idea that you give the system input, sensory input, you get a response and you can manipulate it. And as we know, in electrical system, probably electrical system and nervous system, you get two response. You get increase in output, or you can decrease the output. That's the two things you can do. So I think they played around with this whole idea, and this whole idea only.
Uh, I agree. As far as stimulus and response is concerned, which is sort of what we say, the fundamental underlying principle of reflex hierarchy theory, that there is a stimulus and there is a response. But from there, that is from Sherrington's, again, we need to see it from the historical context of what we have known about nervous system and how it functions in 20th century. Right? Many things
Early
which
part of,
we taken for, yeah, you are saying?
early part of the 20th century.
Early part of 20th century, right? So many of the facts of about how nervous system function, which we now take it for granted, such as a synapse or a stress reflex or a monosynaptic reflex, these are all at that time it is unknown. Say, for example, Sherrington identified that there is a synapsis there, right? So we need to see from that context that how these ideas are evolved. I the uh, what the mistake in terms of reasoning, if I have to say, is that this is the physiology by which a nervous system communicates information from one part of the nervous system to other part or to the peripheral part. What they missed out is how this is leads to control of behavior in a sense such as walking. So that is where say if I have to give us analogy to it, say for example, most of the electronic equipments around us, it works by electrical energy. You need to plug it or you need to have a battery. But the output of the many systems that are electronic are very, very different. Some may be a simple fan just starts a motor, or you may have more complex machines. Uh,
Like the laptop you and I are
yeah,
working on.
right. So if we just understand, all of it, of course, work by electricity passing from one place to another place. But if you want to start understanding the how the system work, the output part is what they have not. They have took it very simplistically. That's what I think.
Uh, uh, that may be true, because we are not there. So, uh,
Yeah.
well, but it looks like a sort of a right assumption in the sense that um, say, for example, if you understand mm, uh, how your biceps works, it should also be same for biceps femoris in your lower limb also, or whether it is for your digitalis, it should be also same for your pectoral muscles or your quadriceps muscles. So in a way, we everybody should think that, at least that's what I think they would have thought of, is that, okay, if it is all electrical, so it's just all these muscles are interconnected and they are all working together to produce, say, for example, as you said, walking. Um, that is from a reductionist approach to a global approach. I think I'm not sure whether it was a mistake or not. I'm not sure whether to call it as a mistake or not. Um, I think that's the uh, that is the scope of the science they would have had at that particular period of time. They didn't have an MRI or a electron microscope to peer into the um, muscles and the nerves and the smaller tissues and things like that. But I overall understand what you're saying.
Right. So, as you are pointing out, one of the major feature of the way they have understood nervous system function is the using a reductionist approach. And also they looked at a nervous system from the perspective of how you look at a simple system rather than a complex system.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the tools that they have used also something that are very useful to study a simple system. Say, for example, reductionist approach is ideally suited to understand a simple system or to even a fixed simple system.
No, even to understand muscles separately, it's a wonderful idea. But how the muscles and the nervous system work together to produce a complex movement, I think that's where it fails.
Right. So to moving on in terms of their other assumptions, I think what is fundamental to many approaches is that their assumptions about what is the determinants of abnormal motor behavior. Now, to clarify what I mean by abnormal motor behavior is everything we see it on patients, right? In terms of their walking, when they're doing their daily functions, there's quite a lot of abnormality that is there, whether they're walking, drinking water, or eating, any other daily function. It looks very unusual, and also it's not very successful also to continue their daily life. So what they thought is the primary reason for this abnormality is that they all have had certain assumptions, and majority of their treatment techniques are driven by these assumptions. So what do you think are the key assumptions about abnormal motor behavior, which we are commonly seeing in our clinic?
Now, in case of PNF, they don't talk about a particular it was not written for a particular disease or anything like that. So they don't make assumptions about the disease as much as anything. There are three people who made huge assumptions. One is Bronstrom, another one is Bobat, another one is Janieris. Right. Bronstrom and Bobat made assumptions about this stimulus part of it. If there is something wrong in the stimulus, you get a response which is skewed. So when they looked into the stimulus, one of the stimulus they thought was the tone was some or other. It was skewed and it got increased, and it produced in terms of Bronstorm, she thought that led to the movement itself being sort of working together. That's what she called it, as a synergy, rather than as a fractional movement. Fractional movement is I can do just this, just this. She thought that everything happens together, right? So again, that comes from the idea of the Sherrington's decelebrated cats to all other things, what happens to the reflexes and things like that when you have a brain injury. So Bobat also had the same idea. It's not much difference because if you look at it from the cerebral palsy, which was their first and major work. Afterwards, they started to. Most of the ideas of how abnormalities happen, because they wrote a book on cerebral palsy also,
Yeah.
how abnormalities happen. They thought that when you cut off the cortex, when you cut off at the midbrain level, so what happens to the reflexes? How the reflexes are sort of here. Why I'm talking about reflexes, because the stimulus leads to response. That is what Sherrington's main idea. So this reflexes itself is getting uh, disrupted, and they are skewed, and they are producing sort of erratic, noisy behavior rather than sort of a normal behavior.
Yeah, and also what I thought was, as far as their attribution to the abnormal motor behavior, is the emphasis on reflexes, which is again, I think it is coming directly from the Sherrington's idea that reflexes, or the the compounding or chaining of the reflexes, what producing ultimate motor behavior. So they have thought of working. If you work on these reflexes, it's again a reductionist way of looking at it. They identify some reflexes as abnormal and some as normal. So most of the treatment techniques are directed towards cutting down or inhibiting some of the reflexes and then exaggerating. The and the major difference, again, I can understand that at that time it was not very well understood about the interaction with the environment. So the environment, how the movements are produced as an interaction with the environment, is often it was not seen at all. Everything is seen coming from the brain, as the brain as what they call the controller of movement, is what, if we can summarize the overall theoretical point of view, is that they thought brain is a controller of movement, and ironically attempts are made to control the controller by giving treatment, right? And mostly by giving sensory based treatment.
Right.
And also yeah, go on.
Correct.
And also that the use of sensory inputs are cornerstone of almost all approaches. This is what I think. And
Yeah.
only difference between these approaches is what sensory input they thought is very relevant for motor behavior, and what methods they used to stimulate or to stimulate the movement. Say, for example, in Roots approach, they have predominantly used uh, somatosensory inputs, such as touch and pressure and vibration and temperature and so on. But if you look at Brunstrom and Bobat, they're predominantly used proprioceptive approach. I think in Bobat, a lot of proprioceptive inputs are given emphasis, this shunting rule and quite a few things they mentioned. And in Brunstrom, they sort of initially they used a lot of somatosensory inputs, and then slowly they are moving on to use a proprioceptive input. This is the commonality in terms of types of sensory inputs they use.
I will make it more simpler. What else can you give as a sensory input? This is all. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
Right. So even though you can say this different, that different, as I told you, the stimulus is limited. You can have visual, you can have auditory, you can have sensory, proprioception, touch, and things like that. Probably vestibular. So there is no big secrets in terms of I will give this stimulus. That these are the stimulus. There is nothing more, nothing less. That's all.
Yeah, and they saw nervous system as more of a reactive organ. The assumptions are, because when we are trying to send an input, means that it is fundamentally an organ that works on reaction rather than an organism or an organ that produces purposeful voluntary movement. And also I again I always identify a lot of ironies in this. Is if you look at Bobat approach, there is more talk of voluntary control, right? Even in brainstorm. But the irony is that the voluntary control is being facilitated by constantly giving something from outside, where your
Right.
approach is reactionary, that you do something, you make them bear weight on their hand, or you try to inhibit, you try to use the key points of control, or you position. All of it is meant to work it as a reaction system, but the goal is to bring voluntary motor control.
Um, and also the other important thing, this is not only true there, now it's also now true, where people are trying to uh, normalize the nervous system, right? They're trying to recover, how recover the system to its original form or something like that. Which by definition the nervous system cannot do. That's what you read it in second semester physics, right? Unlike other cells, the neurons have a pretty limited plasticity, and neurogenesis are very limited. And so that is one of the ironies, and that is where I think most of our physiotherapy is mistaken, in the sense that we are trying to normalize, correct it, and things like that. And again, as you have said, the irony is we are sort of rehabilitation professionals where we are trying to normalize, which sort of still ruins cerebral palsy in our country, where they are trying to make the child walk normally rather than make him go to school or um, dance or sing or something like that. Which, if you talk us about that, will keep on going. I just want to add one more point, if you will, about, as I told you, Bobat and Bronstorm were talking about the sensory part, which leads to problems in the motor system and things like that. So there was only one system left out, the vestibular and the other thing. So there was another woman who came in the White House and said, no, this is the problem in the vestibular. And as I said,
Gene
there are
Iris.
limited, yeah. So there are limited systems. So now in the 60s and 70s, we have covered all the systems have been defective, and it can be activated to either sort of facilitate the system or inhibit the system. So that is, in a nutshell, the approaches of neurology.
Yeah. Sensory integration, which was come relatively later, it is just an the old wine in the new bottle in terms of roots approach, is, in my view, that is the most ridiculous approach of ridiculous way of looking at nervous system, totally, because it came later. And there is just to think there is one system, that is sensory system, that is all responsible for movement.
Behavioral problems, not just moments, behavioral problems.
Right. And the irony again is that they say it's dynamic systems, it's based on dynamic systems. Within systems, yes, plural.
uh, uh, again, I don't mind what Janice did or did it in with a limited understanding of the nervous system or the behavioral system. I don't know how she developed and things like that in great detail. But
I'm surprised when people are still hanging on to every word these people have said as though that's the Bible or the Gita. It just looks, it doesn't augment well for medicine to keep on quoting people as though we are studying literature. Jane Eyre said this, Bobat said this. Who cares what they said in terms of quotations? They say theoretical ideas, that's all right. Say, for example, every book you start reading about sensory integration, it will say that the sensory impulses is the diet of the nervous system. What sort of quote? I don't know. It looks worse than what Ramdev, that yoga guy, can conjure up, right? So that ruins medicine. It's just poor that people are following it now. That is the sad part.
Yeah, and okay, so coming back to our assumption, we've looked into their motor control assumptions and also the determinants of the motor behavior. Most of these approaches have assumed that there is an abnormality in the input, which is what has led to the output. And Bobat, again, they use some technical terms such as shunting rule. Those who have read, you will know that is, she says that that is the fundamental physiology for how the treatment works. And many of you may not be familiar with shunting rule, but if you are asking your patient with hemiplegia to bear weight on their upper limb, you are using shunting rule. So you may not be, that's the problem when we don't know, when we are not familiar with approaches, right? And all other treatment, whether it is a key points of control, which we are using to bring in a movement, where Bobat approach has thought that it is the selective control as a higher level of control. That is, selective control meaning a person's ability to control isolated individual movement is considered to be the highest level of control. And reflex level control is considered to be lowest level of control. And controlling movements with mass movement patterns is considered somewhat in the middle. But later, at least with our understandings of dynamic systems theory, and later we now know that the isolated movement control are far more simplistic rather than the multi-jointed movement control is slightly more complex than that. So, what are your thoughts on? Do you agree?
Uh, now, if it is a voluntary movement, I'm not sure whether it is a simple movement or lots of joints are moving, or are they same or they different? Are they more complex? I'm not sure, because say, for example, if I ask you to do this movement, right? This is an isolated movement. A lot of you may not be able to do it. Or some simple tricky movements like this, right? In phase, out phase, we can. So it's not sure whether it is just an individual movement or a complex movement. I think the how to differentiate, I can sort of reframe it in a different manner. There is a difference between purposeful and non-purposeful movements, and purposeful movements are always far more complex and non-purposeful movements.
Right. And most of these approaches or have used movements that are non-purposeful.
Yes, that is the I think that is the biggest fault we had in physiotherapy. I'm not talking just about Bobat Roots or anybody. I'm talking about the whole neuro itself, where we talk about non-purposeful movements as though they are the driving force of everything, and the predictors to outcome. Say, for example, even today, we know that the Fogelmeyer is considered as the gold standard for measurement in stroke patients. So I think that is where I think we need to move on to more non-purpose and then move on to purposeful movement. Why? Because if you don't add purpose, there is no patient in that. If it is non-purposeful movements, you are checking your car for pressure or radiator for water levels or something like that. You're not, you know, there is no patient, there is no human person there. So if you don't add that purpose, it's not science for me. Medical science, sorry.
Uh, that may be the hangover from Sherrington's experiments on spinal cats. Uh,
Uh, I'm not sure it's the Sherrington's hangover. I just think that medicine is taught in a more one of the non-scientific uh, educations I can think of is medicine. It's not taught in a scientific manner, at least in the country where we live. Uh, I'm assuming that's true in all countries also. So we just don't think of people as people with disease. We just think that they have problem in their liver, the problem in their lungs and things like that. But that might be also useful for in some instance where you want to have that separation between the patient dying and you getting affected and things like that. But most of the time, it's a horrible idea to see them without um, see them as organs and muscles and movements and things like that, rather than a purpose, function. What do they want? Why do they want? And things like that. Because I think that's what people say in cancer also. So it's not just in physiotherapy; it's all over.
okay, so moving on in terms of treatment outcomes. Majority of this treatment has achieved a popularity. I'm sure there must have been a lot of quite a different, lot of similar approaches might have been, different parts of the world would have been developed at that time. We are not aware due to lack of popularity and so on. The reason for the popularity is believed to be the success of this treatment. That means the treatment was successful in terms of addressing patient's problem. So how can we justify that? Because we have been discussing about the theoretical assumptions and how they have looked at it slightly from a narrow perspective, but they are popular because they are successful. So again, this is coming to our the first initially the theme that we discussed, that theory is different, practical is different. But a lot of people use this as an argument
Yeah.
that you may say
Yeah.
all these things, but my patient improves. Bobart's approach, it's very popular and so on.
I think one of the biggest problem again in medical science is we all think from our lived experience, not from objective measurement of anything. We never measure anything objectively. What I mean by objective measurement is not some blood sugar level or this parameter, that parameter. I'm just saying whether my patient got better.
I mean, third person perspective.
Yes, from his point of view, whether it was okay, and okay, did he have a good life? Did we make him die later on? Did we make his living more livable? That kind of thing. So when we think from our lived experience alone, we all know what are the biases which fall into that. From thinking that one patient who got better, that's the one thing which gets stuck in your mind, to thinking that I have spent so much of my time and energy to learn something for 2 years, and suddenly, whatever said and done, you can't think that that is wrong. It had happened to Einstein, to Newton. Einstein was fighting all over his life afterwards. Some theory he didn't accept within his special relative theory. Same thing, Newton also. So even for great minds, it's not possible to overcome that. Uh, the proprietary you have over a treatment which you learn from some person, but you don't have the propriety over your patient's good outcome, right? That is what you should be driving towards. Sadly, the
And
lived
just
experience.
sorry to interrupt, that there is the other side if one claims proprietary over the treatment outcome, it is also implied that one must claim proprietary on poor outcomes too.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't happen when patient doesn't recover. We reverse the thing to patient. No, you didn't do exercises.
Correct.
Right? So there is again the irony.
Go on, go on.
Yeah, that's just that I was just trying to point out the in the reasoning that the flaw in that reasoning thing, that as physiotherapists we are doing something to get them better, right? So if we are one thing, it's not the flawed reasoning, even if you go with that. But even if you are so sure that you are the reason patient, anything happens to the patient, then we must also be claiming the
Right.
poor outcomes also. But both are not, I don't think patient doesn't recover, does mean the physiotherapist has to be blamed, for the same reason that all positive recovery physiotherapists cannot, or any medical practitioner for that matter, cannot just claim all success to them and give them all failure rates to some other external factors, because our human body has a innate system by which it protects, it recovers against any external injury or external sources. So what medicine can do is to ensure that there is a favorable environment around to have that recovery or healing to take place. From a more generic sense, I'm saying.
Right. In a way, we can change the probability, but not. Uh, it's not. You can. There are so many confounders. It's not always just you alone. That alone is not. So, if you look out for the outcomes of whatever we are talking about. Now, when you started college, we had a patient, right? We had a child, and that child now is finished college.
Yeah.
Child with cerebral palsy has finished college. Now, out of all the patients I have treated, that's the only child that has done that, right?
And so probably likely to be the remaining part of
my
life
whole
too.
career also, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I know what are the failures or what are the things which I can achieve or what I'm not achieving. So I'm not claiming that my cerebral palsy is the best treatment I can make them do this or that. I am not sure why people are not telling us or teaching us, no, these are the limitations. I think that is one of the problems in the approaches. That is thinking that everything is, this is the method, the best method to make my patient run around and things like that uh, without looking inside and seeing what are happening to my patient. Not it really, a lot of people have been practicing for 10, 15 years in cerebral palsy. You will very well know how many of them have went to school and how many of you are still being carried by their mothers. That's easy to do, but again, our brain will not allow it to do.
Right. So coming back to the outcome, how they why they're successful and popular. So to summarize what has been discussed so far, is that most of these approaches, and it's not just the approach, even today, there is a common tendency among clinicians, health professionals in general, to attribute any success that comes out of treatment to the treatment alone. There is spontaneous recovery is often, that is actually, we have a lot of evidence to show that spontaneous recovery plays a major role in treatment outcome we get. And yeah,
Classic case is the COVID now.
Sorry, I didn't get.
The classic case is the COVID.
Yes.
99% of your patients are going to get recovered. Probably 1 or 2 might be because of the treatment they are getting. Probably 10%. We'll have 10%, but the 90% are going to recover by themselves. You're just going to tell them, don't worry, just wait.
Yeah. right? So what most of them have assumed that they attributed all the success following treatment to only treatment, and spontaneous recovery is often not even thought. I don't know, but I'm assuming if that has to be the assumption, not thought of a possible contributor. Secondly, other reason could be that the documentation of the success is more of, pent on as a legend, that somebody said they are very successful and everybody keeps saying, but they didn't, we are not aware of any published works of what was the patient status baseline and at what time. No information is available, so it's just of word of mouth, and or the testimony of patients or the therapists who are in there. And also, even if you're really an objective person who wants to, but if you're just relying on your clinical observation to be specific memory, it's impossible to remember. Our memory is not designed to remember everything like a computer memory, right? It remembers, worst moments or very happy moments, successful case or failure case, and so on. Even the failure case, our ego is far equipped well enough to hide that, to push it under, right? So we need to understand they all are human beings, right? So the understanding cognitive biases and not having systematic recording of the treatment data, and more importantly, what they identified or what they determined as a treatment success. Because with what they have written in the textbooks, it appears that they've identified changes in the quality of movement as a success, treatment success, rather than improvement in the patient's functional status. They thought that there is a carryover, that if the quality of movement improves, it would automatically lead to better functional status. But if you are a clinician who's working for at least 5 years, you will know that quite a lot of our patients, despite having questionable quality of movement, they have achieved a good functional status. And again, some of you might ask, the patients still want a better quality of movement, but that would be for some of the future discussion, where does the quality of movement actually change or not? It's an important question. They all assume that it changes, but we don't really have a documentation to show that patient is coming up with a severe circumdextry gait and after treatment they go without circumdextry gait. I mean, I have not seen it. Have you seen?
Right? I've done everything which is possible in the book. I have not.
Right. So if you are objective enough, you will know that these are all things that we do not really have evidence. Even our own clinical observation doesn't tell that patient comes 3 months after with a circumdextry gait and going home without circumdextry gait. Completely reduced. It's impossible. So to coming to the outcome, these are all the fundamental flaws, problems in the way the outcomes were determined. It is one is their own cognitive biases have influenced them and what they considered as a success. And there is no documentation of what was before and after. There is no comparison. For us to say something success, there has to be a starting point, what was there, and compare as a group. These are all very, very fundamental. Again, Mr. Hariom just pointed out maybe a few minutes ago, is that in medicine, in any simple basic sciences, physics and all, you can't even think of saying something works without any data. I mean, this is blasphemy, isn't it? But the opposite is that without any data.
No, you can't even put an ad in the Hindu paper by saying that we are the number one AC in India. If you say that, the Hindu paper will ask you for a document to say in what outcome or what metric you are the number one, right? But not in medicine.
Yeah. So I think we have come to the end of this discussion. Let me just summarize it. We have looked into three major things in terms of theoretical assumptions. That is why a theory is the base, right? So theory is different, practical is different. These are all. I really don't know what it means. Theory is, you cannot have practical comes from theory. I mean, you can't have it different, right? So theories are fundamental, and theoretical assumptions, that's they are like we have also discussed about this folk legend of blind men trying to figure out an elephant. So theories are that hands that is given to them, then what they're trying to figure out, it's basically explanations. And all these approaches were influenced by theoretical assumptions about how nervous system controls movement and how this control is affected as a result of injury. There are theoretical assumptions of these phenomena, which is influenced by reflex hierarchical theory of motor control, which is predominant. And using the same theoretical assumptions, these different approaches have slightly tweaked it, in my view, to have sort of what you can originality for an identity for an approach, even though which is, like I said, we have even pointed out how this is exactly the opposite.
Everything is a car, just make and model is different.
What?
Everything is a car, they just the make and model is different.
Yeah, right. So that is the we have also discussed in depth about that is being sensory input having considered as one of the important determinant of abnormal motor control, at least based on these approaches. And finally, the last theme was how they determined outcome of the treatment. Right? There was hardly any documentation of it, and outcome that is, because it's not systematic observation, they all assume that whatever outcome that follows a treatment is because of treatment. Post hoc ergo propter, the logical fallacy to think that something happened after X, so whatever comes after that is all because of X, and because we didn't observe all the other factors in, right? And finally, the quality of movement, not patient functions, are considered as an outcome. Right? So that's all we have for this discussion. There is just one disclaimer. You may find some of you may feel a little bit offended that these are all stalwarts or pioneers of neurophysiotherapy, and how you can say they're wrong or how they are flawed and so on. We have no personal connections to them. We have no personal enmity towards anyway. Most of them were dead before I was born. So this is, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, I guess. Get into the content of what is spoken and not be oversensitive about individuals. No individuals are important, including me and including Mr. Haryo. You have any final thoughts?
Yeah, follow your evidence to make your patients better, not to make yourself better or make a theory more stronger or practical more practical. The bottom line is the patient has to get better.
And progress in science happens by challenging status quo. So we can't progress by just sticking with what is being there. So this is the fundamental part of evolution. So I hope you enjoyed our discussion. We did. So let us know what you think in comments, or contact us via email or whatever means that you can have. We'll meet again with our last discussion series on neurophysiotherapy approaches, in which we will be discussing what is the current state. A lot of people have this one question: which approach is the best? Or if eclectic approach is much, if you put all together, whether that is coming with a better outcome. These are all questions we'll be addressing in our next discussion.